We had the Constitution, and it was ratified, but the people said, unless we get a guarantee of our rights. Many states, many people were not going to ratify, especially Virginia. The Baptists were against the Constitution because they were suffering persecution in most of the colonies. Because most of the colonies in those days had state religions. And so the Baptists were hated by all of the Protestants because Baptists weren't Protestants. And you got to be Protestant. And the Protestants got along with each other somewhat, but everybody hated the Baptists. And so the Baptists were against the Constitution because then they would, if the Constitution was ratified, then the federal government would be able to persecute them just like the state governments were. And they didn't want any centralized power controlling them. At least they had some liberty in some enclaves in the state of Rhode Island and a little bit in New Jersey. I think they did a little bit better. And so anyway, they were against it. And so someone told James Madison. James Madison's campaign manager said, "Look, see, the Constitution process was a long process." And James Madison had been a delegate to the Constitutional Convention. But the period of time for their delegated authority was coming to an end. They're having re-elections for delegates to the Constitutional Convention because they weren't finished with the convention. And so he was having to run, and there's a guy named Barber running against him. And Barber was preferred by the Baptists because he was against the Constitution and federalizing and centralizing power, and the Baptists were afraid of that too. So they were going to vote for Barber. So the Constitution would not be ratified by Virginia. And Virginia was a very populous state at the time, and Baptists were growing really fast at that time. And so James Madison was talking with his campaign manager, and his campaign manager told him, "Look, I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Madison, you're going to have to." He was wondering why he wasn't doing very well in the polls, or somehow he knew that didn't have a guaranteed win. In other words, he knew something was up. There's a movement undercurrent against him. He didn't understand it. He thought he had put together a pretty good Constitution. He thought it was really good, and he couldn't see what was wrong with it. He couldn't see why anybody would be against it. And so his campaign manager says, "You need to go talk to." You need the support of the Baptists. Without the support of the Baptists, you're not going to make it. Barber's going to win. I'm just telling you that as your campaign manager. I'm being honest with you. Without the support of Baptists, you're not going to make it. You're not going to get reelected. And if the guy that put it together, brings it to the convention, doesn't get reelected, you think it's going to pass? He said, you have to get the support of the Baptists. And so he said, well, who should I go see? He says, well, I'll tell you, there's a young Baptist preacher, real up and coming, and everybody respects him. His name is John Leland. You need to go talk to John Leland. So James Madison found out where John Leland lived and rode out there on horseback and knocked on the door, or helloed, whatever they did back in those days. And Mrs. Madison came to the door, and he said, yes, I'm James Madison. And she said, I know who you are. He said, I would like to speak with your husband. You're Mrs. Leland, right? She said, yes. Well, my husband's out praying with God right now. He's out walking with God praying. And James Madison said, well, look, I've ridden a long ways, and I don't want to interrupt the man in his prayer time, but I need a man like him. I need someone. We need God's help, and I need to talk to him. It's very urgent. I speak to him. Where can I find him? She said, well, there's an oak grove, and she described. And so he rode to find this oak grove, a grove of oak trees, and there he found John Leland pacing and praying, and he helloed John anyway, or Brother Leland, and they had a conversation. And Mr. Madison asked Mr. Leland, what is the problem? And Mr. Leland told him, look, haven't you seen what's been happening to us? Our ministers are being jailed, our people are being jailed because we don't, we won't get a license from the state we have a state religion here in Virginia. And we refuse to accept the license, and we don't pay the tax to support the clergy of some religion we don't agree with. And so we're being persecuted. Our people's property is being taken, and our finances, sometimes property, and people have been jailed. And some people have lost their lives in some states, and so we don't want a federalization of this kind of treatment of us. We don't have a guarantee of our rights to religious liberty. And Mr. Madison says, well, I believe in your rights to religious liberty. And I'm shocked to know that this stuff is happening. And I've heard about it. And yeah, we need to put a stop to it. He says, well, there's nothing in the Constitution to guarantee that, and that's why we're against it. And Mr. Madison said, well, look, it's under the ratification process. And I'm running for re-election to the Constitutional Convention and so forth. I'm sorry, it wasn't, yeah, once it started, it's already written, but I need support, and I understand you. And I understand, and I can't change it once the ratification process has started, but what I can guarantee you, and I can just give you a gentleman's agreement, and by the way, gentleman's agreement back in those days was something. A lot more than you signing, something that you're going to pay something, then you try to quibble out of it. But anyway, it's a lot better than that. And so he said, look, I guarantee, I make a promise to you that the First Amendment, I will present, if it's ratified, if you'll support us for ratification, we need that for a strong centralized government so we can protect all the individual states, because otherwise they'll get picked off one by England or whoever wants to take over America. We've got to have a centralized government for the protection of all the states. And so if you'll support me, I promise you I'll put forth an amendment right away, the first year, to protect your religious liberties. And something about John Leland, he looked James Madison in the eye and he just knew something was right about this man, that he meant what he said, and he trusted him. They shook hands on it. And from then on, John Leland, the next Baptist get-together they had of a bunch of churches, he told them about the story. And he was a very powerful voice among the Baptists. James Madison did get the support of the Baptists, and therefore Virginia ratified the Constitution. The Virginia legislature ratified the Constitution for the United States. And then, of course, with Virginia's ratification, that was a major, because it's a big state. You look at the states, a lot of little ones, but Virginia was pretty big. There was no West Virginia at the time, okay? So it was very big. And it was very powerful influence on the rest of the states. And so the Constitution, we know, got ratified. And so every time you see a Baptist church, you got to thank God for the Baptists, because their Constitution probably would not have been ratified without the support of Virginians. But anyway, and the Baptists. So what the First Amendment, what does it say? Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And Thomas Jefferson, I don't know why I keep saying that, because I quoted from the Declaration of Independence earlier, I guess. But James Madison was true to his word, and that's why the First Amendment in the Constitution is one that guarantees religious liberty. First phrase, it covers a lot of stuff, but it's freedom to exercise your religion is number one. It comes before freedom of the press, comes before freedom of assembly, before anything else, the freedom of religion. And the separation of the powers between the government. They cannot pass any law respecting the establishment of religion, nor can they pass any law respecting the prohibition of the free exercise of your religion. So we're protected. Well, if government follows the Constitution.